Every morning the eastern light struck the forum's marble and turned it a dull, burnished gold. Men in white togas moved between temples and basilicas, stepping past merchants and petitioners who pressed forward from the edges of the open space. At the center of it all stood the rostra, the curved speaker's platform. In 133 BCE, the tribune Tiberius Gracchus brought a land reform bill before the assembly. Public land had drifted into private hands for decades. Tiberius forced a vote, blocked other business, and used his office the way it was designed to be used. The Senate treated him as an enemy. A fight broke out on the Capitoline Hill. Tiberius died there, alongside hundreds of supporters. Their bodies went into the Tiber. Rome had crossed a line that could not be erased. 10 years later, his brother Gaius followed the same path. He built alliances, expanded grain subsidies, and attacked senatorial corruption in the courts. When he lost the streets, the Senate reached for armed men again. Gaius died in flight. The precedent was set. Political crisis in Rome ended with citizens killed in public spaces. The wars that followed brought home wealth and rival commanders who had learned that soldiers obeyed the man who paid and fed them, not the institution that sent them. Gaius Marius solved Rome's military manpower crisis by enlisting men with no property, arming them at state expense, and promising them land when the service ended. The soldiers belonged to their general. Lucius Cornelius Sulla understood this and acted on it. When rivals blocked his eastern command in 88 BCE, he marched his army into Rome. Citizens watched from doorways as legionaries walked past Roman temples with weapons drawn. Sulla left, returned, and ruled as dictator. He published proscription lists. Men were killed for their names, their wealth, their associations. When Sulla resigned voluntarily in 79 BCE, what remained was proof. One man could seize the city, purge his enemies, and walk away alive. Pompey Magnus cleared the Mediterranean of pirates in months, then reshaped Rome's eastern provinces through force and settlement. He returned to Italy, expecting land for his veterans and ratification of his decisions. The Senate blocked him at every turn. Marcus Licinius Crassus supplied the money for Roman politics and wanted a conquest to match Pompey's. He took an army east against Parthia and was destroyed at Carrhae in 53 BCE. His death removed the counterweight between two rivals. Julius Caesar spent a decade in Gaul, fighting through tribes and building 10 seasoned legions whose loyalty ran to him personally. He sent dispatches back to Rome framed as terse necessity. His enemies in the Senate planned to prosecute him the moment he became a private citizen again. Caesar understood this. In January 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon into Italy with 1 legion and moved on Rome. Pompey and most of the Senate fled. The capital fell without a battle. The civil war ran for 4 years across 3 continents. Caesar beat Pompey's forces in Spain, crossed to Greece, and won the decisive battle at Pharsalus in August 48 BCE. Pompey fled to Egypt and was killed on arrival. Caesar remained in Egypt, aligned himself with Cleopatra VII, and returned to Rome to accumulate power in layers: dictatorship, laurel wreath, a throne-like seat in the Senate, command over legislation and appointments. He exercised a king's authority while Rome had no legal category for what he had become. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, a group of senators produced hidden blades in the meeting hall at the theatre of Pompey. Caesar fell under more than 20 wounds. His assassins raised their hands and called out, "Liberty." The city shut its doors. No one rose to join them. Mark Antony secured Caesar's papers, delivered the funeral oration, and watched the crowd burn the pyre inside the forum and go looking for the killers. Brutus and Cassius left Rome within weeks. Caesar's 18-year-old great-nephew Octavian arrived in Italy, claimed the name Caesar, and declared himself a political force on the strength of a will and nothing else. Cicero tried to use him as a tool against Antony, delivering a series of speeches designed to destroy Antony's standing. Cicero had spent his life proving that words moved Rome. He was wrong about what moved it now. Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE and immediately published proscription lists. Soldiers knocked on doors in the dark. Cicero was caught on a road south of Rome in December 43 BCE and killed. His head and hands were displayed on the rostra where he had delivered his speeches. The message needed no explanation. At Philippi in Macedonia in 42 BCE, 2 battles ended the Republic's last military resistance. Cassius and Brutus both died by suicide. The victors divided the empire. Antony took the east, Octavian the west, Lepidus Africa, before fading from power entirely. Antony governed from Alexandria, relied on Cleopatra for ships and money, and conducted himself in ways that Roman propaganda could frame as foreign contamination. Octavian stayed in Italy, learned hard lessons suppressing a veterans' land dispute that became the Perizine War, and built his domestic political base. At Actium in September 31 BCE, the 2 fleets met off western Greece. Antony and Cleopatra broke from the engagement and fled south. Their remaining forces dissolved. Octavian entered Alexandria the following year. Antony and Cleopatra both died by suicide. Octavian took Egypt as his personal estate, absorbed its treasury and grain supply, and returned to Rome holding more power than any Roman since the kings. In 27 BCE, he staged a formal transfer of power back to the Senate and people. The Senate responded by granting him the title Augustus and confirming arrangements that gave him command over all provinces containing legions, tribunician authority, and the power to convene the Senate and propose legislation. Every grant had a republican precedent. Together, they were a monarchy without the name. Augustus kept the appearances: modest house on the Palatine, Senate attendance, civilian dress in the city. He preserved aristocratic prestige while controlling every outcome. He built on a scale that remade Rome in stone. Forums, temples, aqueducts, the Ara Pacis with its carved procession of his household moving in sacred order. The peace was enforced by legions on the frontiers and by grain ships that crossed the sea each season. He outlived his intended heirs. His nephew Marcellus died in 23 BCE. His grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar both died young. His daughter Julia was exiled in 2 BCE. He eventually adopted his stepson Tiberius and bound the succession through family arrangements that tied bloodline to loyalty. In 9 CE, 3 legions under Varus were ambushed and destroyed in the Teutoburg forest by Germanic forces under Arminius, a commander trained in the Roman army. The Eagles were lost. The Rhine became a permanent frontier. Augustus died in August 14 CE at 75. The Senate voted divine honors. The succession passed to Tiberius without civil war, the first transfer of imperial power in Roman history. The republican institutions remained on paper. The chain of command ran through one household, as it had for 40 years, and the machinery continued without interruption. Tiberius walked into power under the eyes of men who had watched Augustus for 40 years. He accepted titles and authority one by one, ruled with caution, and governed through the Praetorian Guard and frontier commanders. The succession question stayed alive in every conversation that mattered. Germanicus, popular with soldiers and civilians, was sent east with broad authority. He died in Syria in 19 CE. People lined the roads when his body came back to Italy. Power inside the palace drifted toward Sejanus, prefect of the Praetorian Guard. Treason trials filled the Senate with legal language and private terror. Men filed charges, waited for verdicts, and disappeared. Some died by execution, some by suicide. Their property moved to the state or to informers who knew how to file a charge. Tiberius withdrew to Capri and governed by correspondence. In 31 CE, he moved against Sejanus. Arrest, condemnation, and execution in a single day. The allies followed. The system had eliminated a man at the top and continued without him. Tiberius died in 37 CE. Caligula entered Rome celebrated and young, with a guard at his back. Within months, senators learned to watch his face before speaking. In January 41 CE, officers of the Praetorian Guard killed him in a corridor. His wife and child died in the violence that followed. The Senate debated restoring the Republic. Soldiers found Claudius hiding in the palace and carried him to their camp. The empire's highest office passed by military decision in a city barracks. Claudius governed through administration, petitions, edicts, household staff managing paperwork and access. In 43 CE, he launched the conquest of Britain. Legions crossed the Channel and established control through forts and roads. It produced taxes, confiscations, and resentments in roughly equal measure. In 60 or 61 CE, the Iceni queen Boudica led a revolt after Roman abuses against her family. Her forces burned Londinium and Verulamium. A Roman governor gathered his troops, held formation in a set battle, and the revolt collapsed in slaughter. Rome punished resistance, then returned to routine administration. Claudius died in 54 CE. Nero came to power as a teenager, guided initially by his mother Agrippina and senior advisors. The court filled with rivals. Agrippina's influence ended in her murder. So did his wife Octavia's. In July 64 CE, fire destroyed large sections of Rome. Nero organized relief and launched rebuilding. A group of Christians was blamed and executed as public spectacle. As provincial governors and commanders weighed their options in 68 CE, revolt spread. The Senate declared him an enemy. Nero fled and died by suicide. 69 CE produced 4 emperors. Legions in different provinces backed their own candidates in rapid succession. Vespasian, with support from eastern armies, secured the capital and founded the Flavian dynasty. His son Titus completed the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The Second Temple destroyed, prisoners taken, spoils carried west. The Flavian amphitheater, later called the Colosseum, rose as an arena for games on a permanent, bureaucratic scale. In 79 CE, Vesuvius erupted without warning. Pompeii and Herculaneum disappeared under ash. The empire could build roads across continents. It could not stop a volcano. Domitian, the younger Flavian son, ruled on suspicion. He relied on informers, purged senators, and strengthened the frontiers. In 96 CE, palace officials killed him. The Senate chose Nerva, an older senator with no dangerous ambitions, who immediately adopted Trajan, a capable frontier commander, as his heir. Adoption became the mechanism for controlled succession where biology had failed. Trajan expanded the empire through 2 Dacian wars north of the Danube, turning the campaigns into stone, a carved column in Rome showing Roman armies marching, bridging rivers, and accepting surrender. War presented as organized labor under command. He pushed east into Parthian territory near the end of his reign. The conquests did not hold. He died returning from the east in 117 CE. Hadrian, his adopted heir, made different choices. He traveled through the provinces, inspected garrisons, and drew cleaner borders. In Britain, he ordered a wall built across the north, stone, gates, and forts controlling movement along a fixed line. In Judea, the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 CE required sustained campaigning to suppress. Death, displacement, and provincial reorganization followed. The empire held territory through permanent garrisons and periodic mass violence when resistance formed. Antoninus Pius ruled from 138 to 161 CE, with few major wars and steady administration. His reign became a reference point for stable governance. That calm depended on earlier military consolidation and constant frontier readiness. Along the edges of the empire, soldiers at their posts wrote letters home asking for socks and supplies, invited friends to birthdays, and spent long stretches waiting. Marcus Aurelius spent most of his reign on the Danube frontier, pushing back Germanic groups crossing under pressure. Disease moved through the empire during these years, carried by troops returning from the east. Cities and camps lost population. The tax base shrank. The army still needed pay. He died in 180 CE and passed power to his son Commodus, a choice of blood over merit that shaped the decade that followed. Commodus preferred the palace to the frontier, sold access through favorites, and appeared in the arena in staged combats as a display of dominance. In 192 CE, members of his household killed him. Civil war returned in 193 CE. Septimius Severus marched from the Danube, secured Rome, and reorganized the Praetorian Guard with his own men. He governed as a military emperor, raised army pay, and campaigned in the east and in Britain. He died at Eboracum in 211 CE. His sons Caracalla and Geta briefly shared power before Caracalla murdered Geta and purged his supporters. In 212 CE, Caracalla extended Roman citizenship to most free inhabitants across the empire, expanding legal status and tax revenue simultaneously. He was killed by soldiers in 217 CE. Short reigns and coups followed. Elagabalus, a teenage priest raised to emperor by guards and relatives, alienated the Senate and the army with his court behavior. The Praetorian Guard killed him in 222 CE and raised his cousin Severus Alexander. Severus Alexander governed through advisors and faced mounting pressure on two frontiers. The new Sasanian dynasty had replaced Parthia in the east, and Germanic groups were testing the Rhine and Danube simultaneously. In 235 CE, his troops mutinied and killed him. They raised a new emperor from their own ranks. The Senate had no voice in it. The long period of relative stability that had run from Vespasian through the adoptive emperors was over. The army now chose emperors more often than any family arrangement or senatorial vote, and the empire was about to discover what that meant at scale. Near the Rhine in 235 CE, soldiers lifted Maximinus onto a shield and declared him emperor over the corpses of Severus Alexander and his mother. The Senate in Rome confirmed the choice because legions stood behind it. The next years turned into a sequence of marches, executions, and short reigns. In 238 CE, 6 emperors came and went within months. Coins were still minted with imperial portraits. Governors still issued edicts. Tax collectors still demanded payment. The center kept changing hands. Pressure arrived from every direction. Germanic groups raided across the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The new Sasanian dynasty pushed into Roman territory from the east, threatening cities in Syria and Mesopotamia. Each military response needed money, supplies, and soldiers, and each demand tightened the state's grip on communities already struggling to comply. In 249 CE, Decius took power and tried to impose unity through a requirement of public sacrifice to the traditional gods. Officials issued compliance certificates, Some people stood in line and signed. Others refused. In 251 CE, Decius died in battle against the Goths. In 260 CE, Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persians during a campaign in the east. He did not return. His capture spread panic through the administration. As the center weakened, provinces broke away. In the west, a separate regime governed Gaul and Britain. In the east, Palmyra, under Queen Zenobia, took control of Egypt and parts of the eastern provinces. Both breakaway powers kept Roman administration and Roman language in place while ruling independently. Aurelian seized the throne in 270 CE and treated the crisis as a military problem. He fought through the Balkans, marched east, and forced Palmyra back under control, captured Zenobia, then turned west and defeated the Gallic regime. The empire's territory came back under one ruler. In Rome, he built a new circuit of walls around the city. They still stand in sections today, showing a capital that had begun preparing for siege. Diocletian took power in 284 CE and rebuilt the government by dividing it. He shared rule with another senior emperor and added 2 junior emperors beneath them, each holding a region with its own court and field army. Bureaucracy expanded. Tax demands grew more systematic. The army grew larger and more expensive. In 303 CE, Diocletian launched the most severe imperial persecution of Christians yet, ordering churches destroyed, texts burned, and sacrifices demanded. The policy ended when he abdicated in 305 CE, but the scars remained. The arrangement broke apart after his abdication. Commanders fought through proclamation and battle for more than a decade. Constantine won the decisive contest in 312 CE at the Milvian Bridge near Rome, where his rival Maxentius died in the fighting. Constantine favored Christianity and issued policies of toleration. Bishops gained access to imperial power and resources. Churches multiplied. In 324 CE, he became sole ruler and founded a new capital at Byzantium, dedicating it as Constantinople in 330 CE. The imperial court shifted east in practice and in attention. In 361 CE, Julian became emperor and tried to restore traditional religious practice through policy and patronage. He removed privileges from Christian institutions and funded pagan temples. He led a campaign into Persia and died of a wound during the retreat in 363 CE. No later emperor followed his path. Christianity kept its hold on imperial identity, while older religious practice continued in many places outside the cities. In 376 CE, Gothic groups fleeing pressure from the Hunnic people to their east arrived at the Danube and asked to cross into Roman territory. Roman officials allowed them in and then mismanaged their settlement. Abuse and hunger turned refugees into armed rebels. In 378 CE, Emperor Valens met them near Adrianople and was killed. The defeat forced a change in strategy. The empire increasingly relied on negotiated agreements with armed groups inside its borders, offering land, military service, and legal recognition in place of outright control. Theodosius I died in 395 CE, and the administration split permanently between East and West under his 2 sons. The West governed from Milan and then Ravenna, close to threatened frontiers. The East governed from Constantinople with stronger finances and more defensible geography. In 410 CE, the Visigoth leader Alaric looted Rome after failed negotiations with the Western court. The sack lasted days and shocked elites across the Mediterranean who still thought of Rome as the fixed center of order. The Western government survived but kept losing territory through war, settlement, and political accommodation with armed groups it could no longer expel. The Vandals crossed into North Africa in 429 CE and took Carthage in 439 CE, cutting off key grain and tax revenue. Attila led Hunnic forces deep into the west in the early 450s. In 451 CE, the Roman general Aetius and Visigothic allies stopped Attila's advance at the Catalonian plains in Gaul. Attila invaded Italy the following year and withdrew without taking Rome. Aetius was killed by the Western Emperor in 454 CE. The emperor was killed in turn in 455 CE. Internal violence continued alongside external pressure until there was no longer enough of either army or government to hold the Western structure together. In 476 CE, the soldier Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, and sent the imperial insignia to Constantinople. He ruled Italy as king. Roman law, titles, and administration persisted under new rulers. Because the machinery of courts and taxation still worked, the Western imperial office simply stopped. The Eastern Empire carried the Roman name forward. Justinian I took the throne in 527 CE and pursued reconquest. His general Belisarius took North Africa from the Vandals in 533 CE and invaded Italy the following year, fighting the Ostrogoths in a long war that lasted until 554 CE. The campaigns ended in imperial victory and a ruined peninsula. During these same years, in 541 CE, plague spread through the empire. People died in cities and ports. Labor shortages hit farms and workshops. Tax revenue fell while military costs stayed constant. In 628 CE, Emperor Heraclius ended a devastating war with Persia after years of deep campaigning into Persian territory. The victory came at a cost that left both empires exhausted. Arab armies, united under the early Islamic community, moved out of Arabia in the 630s and defeated Roman forces in Syria and Palestine. Jerusalem fell in 637 CE. Egypt fell in the early 640s. The Eastern Empire lost the provinces that had supplied much of its grain, taxes, and manpower. Constantinople survived behind its walls and its control of the sea. The empire adapted by consolidating control over Anatolia and the Balkans and reorganizing its military districts. It fought Bulgars in the north, managed alliances with steppe peoples, and conducted long theological disputes over religious images in churches that consumed councils, officials, and artworks across several reigns. In 1054 CE, accumulated tensions between the Eastern and Western churches produced a formal split. In 1204 CE, armies of the Fourth Crusade looted Constantinople instead of fighting elsewhere. A Latin regime took control. Greek successor states formed in the region. In 1261 CE, forces from Nicaea retook the city. The restored empire held a much smaller territory and depended on diplomacy and tribute to survive. Ottoman power expanded through Anatolia and the Balkans, across the 14th and 15th centuries. The empire's territory shrank to the city and its immediate surroundings. In April 1453, Sultan Mehmed II began the siege. Cannons fired at the land walls. Defenders repaired breaches at night. Ottoman forces dragged ships over land to pressure the sea walls. Food grew scarce. The last emperor, Constantine II, moved along the walls, spoke with commanders, and took his position where the fighting was heaviest. On the 29th of May 1453, Ottoman forces launched a final assault before dawn. A breach opened in the walls. The defenders fell back. Constantine VII died in the fighting near the walls. Ottoman troops entered the city and took control. The Roman imperial line that began with Augustus ended in a city built to replace Rome, defended by men who still called themselves Romans.